What I've seen throughout my career is with each new generation of researcher comes an ever greater willingness to look beyond that paradigm of publish or perish, ever more getting the importance of impact and a real thirst for spin outs and startups and enterprise. And that's the kind of researcher that we like to work with.
Hello, and welcome to the Partnerships Podcast series by UIIN. I'm Sarah Jabber, Director at UIIN, and your host for today. In this episode, we're joined by Nicholas Haskins, Chief Operating Officer of the New South Wales Smart Sensing Network, who will share how the Nssn bridges the gap between academia, industry, and government to turn research into real-world impact. From fostering partnerships to overcoming collaboration challenges, this episode is packed with insights on making innovation happen. Let's dive in. Nicholas is the Chief Operating Officer at the New South Wales Smart Sensing Network, which we're going to be calling Nssn during this conversation. He joined the network in May 2018, where he's responsible for implementing strategy, driving growth, and managing the overall operations of the network. Over a 20-year career that spanned roles across 3 of the major universities in New South Wales, Nicholas brings an in-depth understanding of the higher education sector and research landscape, and finely attuned skills in university administration, stakeholder engagement, communications, and research development. Nicholas, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Of course. So, New South Wales Smart Sensing Network. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that just to set the stage. What is it, and what is its vision and mission when it comes to smart sensing in New South Wales?
Great, thank you. We are an innovation network set up by the New South Wales government. And for those that are watching from around the world, the New South Wales government is the government of the state of New South Wales here in Australia. Our capital city is Sydney. So we're certainly one of the biggest states in New South Wales, and we have a thriving innovation ecosystem. So in that sense, we're parochially serving the state of New South Wales. We are an extension of the Office of the New South Wales Chief Scientist and Engineer. Established in 2016, we exist really to bring together universities, government, and industry to translate the world-class research that's happening in our universities and get that out into smart sensing innovation and hopefully on a pathway to commercialization. We're a consortium of the 8 leading universities across New South Wales and the Australian Capital Territory. So you might be familiar with some of our members. I'll quickly run through them, but they're UNSW, the University of Sydney, Western Sydney University, Macquarie University, UTS, University of Newcastle, the University of Wollongong, and Australian National University.
Yeah, nice. As you were saying that, it made me wonder, is this unique to New South Wales or is it common across Australia? And my other question is, if there are others other than smart sensing, are there others in New South Wales?
We're fairly unique in Australia in the sense of the structure and remit of the innovation networks. There are a few others that the New South Wales government has set up in very sector-specific areas. There is a defence innovation network, there's a decarbonisation network, and a connectivity innovation network. We're unique in that we're cross-cutting across sectors, and we're focused on the application or the technology itself of smart sensing. But there is this sense in New South Wales that from a government perspective, they do really want to see greater translation and greater outreach of universities, and that's what we're set up to do. We've looked across the world, and we're somewhat similar in Scotland to an organisation called Nssn. They're an innovation network set up by the Scottish government about I think 10 years even before us. And they're doing great work in the areas of sensing and IoT. So really quite similar remit to us there in Scotland.
Yeah. And why smart sensing? What is that?
That's a good question. It's an area that, we're super excited about, but of course I would say that. It's unlike the other networks that exist in New South Wales that are sector specific. This is really a technology focused network. Sensing very broadly defined. On any given day, we're working right across ag tech, med tech, space, defense, smart cities. So it's broad in that sense, but very much focused on smart sensing. That cuts into the worlds of IoT, certainly cuts into AI, quantum. So we've got quite a bit of play space, I would say, and that's something that we quite enjoy.
Okay, great. So you mentioned that it's a consortium of 8 universities, but can you tell us more around how does the Nssn foster partnerships between academia, government, which you're also really closely connected to, and industry?
We like to have a foot in each of those areas, and we act as a bridge between those 3 different sectors. We're quite proud that we can translate the language and the timelines that each of those areas work on, and to really bring them together in concert to hopefully do some really fantastic things. As I said, we are an extension of the New South Wales government through the Office of the Chief Scientist and Engineer. So we have that pathway into government, and we can open doors for our partners into government and hopefully even into areas of procurement and purchasing through there. Our team comes from industry, so we speak the language of industry. We know what their drivers are, and we're housed within our university. So we have great access to researchers and to cutting edge equipment across our 8-member universities. So that puts us in a unique position to bring those three areas really closely together and then broker great relationships.
Can you maybe give us an example of how might you identify a potential partner to work with or potential collaboration opportunity? Does it come through the researchers, the university, or are you maybe looking out and trying to find collaboration opportunities?
We start with the pain point or the challenge of the industry or government partner as a starting point. Perhaps unlike a business development team within a university, we don't have a product to push out to the world. We start at the other end of the scale with the challenge. So through our team, who are very well networked through industry and government partners, we have conversations with those organizations about what their challenges are and what smart sensing R&D might be able to do to give them a competitive advantage or to make life more efficient or easier for that business or government agency in some respects. We then, through an iterative process, through co-design, we work with those industry or government partners to identify what the research challenge is, and then the right research team, often multidisciplinary, often multi-institutional, to respond to that challenge. And we think that's where our value add is. Industry partners can work with any single university. That's fairly a well-trodden path. We're able to really pick the best researchers, multidisciplinary teams from across institutions to really come up with an exciting solution that probably hasn't been really thought of before. It is often a long and iterative process. Speaking with industry partners, they sometimes don't even know how to articulate the challenge they have in research terms. And so we then serve to translate that kind of challenge into a research question that hopefully our research teams can answer. We've spent a lot of time mapping the capability across our network. So we know what our, for want of a better word, our library of research talent and capability is, so that when we've had that conversation with an industry partner, we can say, okay, here's the right researchers to get into a room, into a conversation with you. And then we help to facilitate the conversation that then leads to hopefully a commissioned research project. Then on the back end of that, we also are very well plugged into government grant schemes right across New South Wales and Australia. So we can then bring in other funding mechanisms on top of any commissioned research dollars from the industry partner.
Yeah, great. I know it's applied research, but are you trying to get to the point where you can commercialize technologies, or is that kind of where you step out, or how does that pathway work?
I love that question because absolutely that's our role. We aren't really interested in fundamental research. The conversations we're having really are at that more applied end of the scale, mid TRL and upwards. I'm assuming that the people listening here today are familiar with TRL. We are more interested in that mid to pointy end of the TRL conversation. So in that respect, we're taking R&D that's probably already fairly well developed in the lab and then applying that to the actual field needs of an industry or government partner and then working with them to commercialize on from there. We're keenly interested in, and some of our KPIs are really wrapped around commercialization outcomes on licensing, on spin-outs, and on jobs created for New South Wales and Australia on the back end of the R&D innovation that we're producing.
Yeah, great. Do you have maybe an example that stands out for you that you'd like to talk to us about around, maybe a successful collaboration or something that generated impact?
I think the one I like to talk of the most, and it was one of our earlier programs, but it's elegant in that with that benefit of the long tail of R&D, we can actually really see what the impact of this project was. It's getting a bit long in the tooth now, but it's a great example to tell. We started a conversation with the water utility industry in Australia. It was a conversation that first started with Sydney Water, the water utility organisation for the Greater Sydney region, about one of their biggest challenges, and that was leaks and breaks in pipe infrastructure across their network. Huge problem in Australia. As you can understand, we're a dry continent. It's not only a financial issue for the company, but it's a huge environmental issue if we're wasting water. It's also very costly to dig up pipes without really knowing exactly where the problem is. So smart sensing had a real role to play there in coming up with new technologies that don't necessarily involve penetrating the ground with invasive measures. Smart sensing sensing can have a number of modalities that can tell you where a leak or break is in the pipe infrastructure without digging anything up, whether that be ground penetrating radar or LiDAR, or in this case as well, quantum sensing, which is really frontier science. It was really exciting stuff. So to step through how that came about, Sydney Water at the time had a fairly modest budget put towards this. We sat down with them. We identified what the challenge was in a scientific term. We then pulled in a fairly large cohort of researchers who might be able to address this problem. Over time, we refined the research program. We designed a range of work packages that cut across those areas: radar, LiDAR, quantum sensing, data analytics, really a multidisciplinary approach to the problem involving 5 different universities. As the conversation wore on, using the skill set that we had in the network and the role that we were able to play as a broker, we were able to bring in 8 other water utilities across Australia, as well as some contract agencies that were working in this area. So what started as a one-off conversation with Sydney Water with a fairly small program of funding was able to snowball to a 9-company consortium, and in the end it became a $3.4 million package of R&D, because each of those organizations was able to come in and tip in a little bit more. And what we found, that when a competitor organization came in, then Sydney Water or others were able to tip in more, and it just snowballed from there. And really that came down to a broker body like the Nssn being able to play that role of a disinterested broker, because bear in mind that we don't have a stake in this. We don't take any financial claim. We're funded by the government, so we don't charge for the services that we provide. We're just really bringing the right mix of people together.
Yeah.
So what we had in the end was 4 universities working on 5 different work packages with 9 industry clients. It was a 3.5-year program of work. It really resulted in some great outcomes. Now, on the back end of that, we're able to measure year on year the millions of litres of water saved due to these technologies that have now gone into operation at those water utilities, as well as the dollars saved for those water utilities in not having to dig up ground where they don't need to. It's also resulted in a spin-out company and various licenses around the world. So it's a great success story, and I think it's a very nice example of the power of the Nssn.
Yeah, that's a really, really nice example, also because it demonstrates the role it plays in addressing local and regional or even national issues, as you mentioned, with the droughts and not wanting to waste water and all of that. And I wanted to maybe dig in a little bit to what you said about the power of a consortium and also the role that you play. You just shared an example of a success story and how it works. But I know, for example, in Australia, the universities tend to be somewhat competitive, especially when it comes to funding and demonstrating who is better in certain areas. I'm curious if you faced any challenges when it comes to these multi-stakeholder collaborations, whether it's competing priorities or different goals that they're trying to get. And if so, how have you been able to navigate some of those?
I've been involved in university networks more or less my entire career, and you are, no matter what, going to be pulled in 8 different directions and have those competing priorities. But I am proud that through the Nssn, we've really been able to change the game, or at least I've seen the time that I've been with the Nssn, which is coming up on 8 years, the power of an organization like the Nssn to demonstrate to universities that more can be achieved working together than working. There's always going to be that competition there, and it's a very friendly competition, and I think it is a great thing. But when you have an organization like the Nssn come along, where we have great buy-in from each of our members, not only from the researchers, but from the dedicated team of coordinators that plug us into those universities, as well as the leadership. They're all very much committed to and behind this. And generally, we see that people are willing to come on board for that. We're able to show through the evidence of working through the Nssn what we're able to generate when we work together. And the solutions to the problems that we at the Nssn focus on are big, grand challenges. They are net zero, they're natural hazards, they're smart cities, they're human health. I think it's clear to most people that not all the expertise in any one of those areas is going to be all within one university. And we come along and say, look, there's a bigger piece of the pie for everybody if we take a collaborative approach to this and go after some of the big problems.
Yeah, exactly. The power of many trying to solve these challenges. And maybe just thinking a bit around the future of the Nssn, what are the plans? Will it stay this consortium of 8 universities? Do you look to maybe expand with others? And I was wondering if you have industry partners that are like maybe strategic partners or also part of the consortium, or is that not? Is that more on a project basis?
I'll start with that question first. We like to have that freedom to operate. So we actually don't have industry members. we don't want to have company A saying, look, I'm the only telco that you should work with, or B saying I'm the only logistics provider that you should work with. We really want to be able to follow wherever there's a possible client with a challenge that we can solve for them. So we really do work on a project by project basis.
Yeah.
All we ask is that when we bring an industry partner in, is that they stump up some funding to solve the challenge that they've got. And I think that's a really good value prop. There's no pay to play in terms of being in or outside the tent. It's, if you've got a problem, then there's going to be a price to pay for solving that problem, and we'll help you get that problem solved. So we're open to working with anyone. And I should just say that it's not just limited to Australian companies, that we do work with and are very happy to work with international organizations or industry partners that might have a smart sensing problem that we know that New South Wales expertise can solve. We are decidedly New South Wales focused, and that's for a couple of reasons. We are obviously funded by the New South Wales government, and there is a remit to serve the taxpayer and the people of New South Wales, and to really inject new ideas and new gusto into the New South Wales innovation ecosystem. So we're not on a huge growth trajectory. We are quite happy with the membership that we've got, and we're a membership-based organization, and we serve the needs of those members. That said, there is always talk that the first N in the Nssn could one day be national, and we are always open to that idea. There are other universities outside of New South Wales that would be natural partners or members of the network that have great strength in smart sensing, and we're very open to a future where that might be the case.
Do you want to be a part of a global community where universities, businesses, and public organizations come together to solve the world's biggest challenges? At UIIN, we equip our members with the skills, tools, and strategies they need to create impactful partnerships that drive real-world change. Whether it's upskilling your team, strengthening your institution's partnership efforts, or becoming more entrepreneurial, UIIN empowers you with the knowledge and support you need. Join us today. Visit uiin.org to find the best plan for your organization.
Maybe building on that a little bit, you talked before about quantum sensing as more of a more novel approach. Just wondering, in smart sensing technologies, what do you see as some of the future directions, and how is NSSN staying at the forefront of these developments?
We're very excited about AI, and I think that goes hand in hand with smart sensing. AI has always been a very big part of the work that the NSSN does, ever since 2016, before it was the huge behemoth that it is today. It's important to say that we're the smart sensing network and not the smart sensor network. And that's an important distinction to make, because smart sensing talks not only about the device innovation itself, but really the back end and the system that wraps around and that feeds the sensor device itself. And that's where a lot of our work is. It's in the sensor fusion, it's in the AI, the data analytics that come off the back end of the sensor. When you think about what a sensor does, it detects the environment around it and delivers data. And it's really through this AI trend that we're seeing now that you are able to get those really great efficiencies or better decision making from the data that the sensors are collecting. So we're hugely interested in that space and exploring how we can invest more in that space. I do think that over time you're going to see the NSSN become more and more an AI network. That I don't think that necessarily will change our name or our brand, but it's certainly going to take more and more of an emphasis in the work that we do and the solutions that we provide. And I think that's hugely exciting to be part of this wave, this point in time in the hype cycle. I think it's hugely exciting for us.
Yeah, I agree. It sounds exciting. Also, I think what you said earlier around that you're not necessarily doing fundamental or discovery-based research, but by working with these technologies, you're somehow combining the two, like really at the forefront of some of the like groundbreaking innovations while still trying to push it forward to commercial application. So it's a nice area to be in. I was wondering as well, when you talked about bringing in the researchers from the universities, do PhD students get involved in the projects with the NSSN? So you maybe thinking about the role you're playing in training that next generation?
Absolutely. I think almost every project that we have, while our communications and I guess the deal making tends to go on involving a CI at an academic salaried level. The research teams really do rely on the efforts of the PhD students and the wider research team. We're keenly interested in bringing forward the next generation of researchers that are coming into this technological space. ECRs and MCR involvement is huge for us. When we speak with industry and government partners, obviously they do like the star researcher, the senior researcher, perhaps with a strong reputation. But right down into the project, you're really seeing that integral involvement of ECRs, PhD students, and that's helping to bring forward the next generation. What I'm also seeing, what I've seen throughout my career, is with each new generation of researcher comes an ever greater willingness to look beyond that paradigm of publish or perish, focus on publication, but ever more getting the importance of impact and a real thirst for spin-outs and startups and enterprise. And that's the kind of researcher that we like to work with, because they get what we do and they're excited by seeing their research make it to market or to social impact.
Yeah, exactly. Impact, it's something we do a lot of work around, and especially with researchers at an early stage, it's so important for them to think about what impact can my work have. And I think this shift from, okay, I'm a researcher, I have to publish papers. Yes, it's important, but that's not the only thing. It's about seeing your work in action. I think going back to that example you shared, if you're working on that and then you're seeing the impact you're having in your, let's say, your region, that can be really rewarding.
It's interesting because there's a term that we don't use in Australian universities, but is very common in European universities. I spent a period of time working at Maastricht University in the Netherlands, and that's valorization.
Yeah.
We don't use that here in Australia, but I think it's a nice term, and it talks about creating value from the work that research does. Now, for almost every researcher in Australia, your work is being funded by the taxpayer, by the people of Australia, and seeing value and creating value from that research is ever more important. And that's not just for dollars for a company. It can be value in terms of the way that a government provides its service to its citizens, for the environment. But I think that a focus ever more importantly on creating value from the research that we do is important.
Yeah, I really like that you bring that up. I agree. Every time I'm working with an Australian university, or not even Australian, non-European, we always introduce that term because it's also a lot more relatable. If you are a researcher, you can associate with valorization, maybe more so than commercialization, especially if you're in the social sciences, let's say, where
Absolutely.
you don't necessarily see the commercial outcome of what you're doing. Maybe thinking about researchers and next generations, I would like to maybe end with a last question around what advice would you give to other organizations that might be looking to build these types of innovation ecosystems and multi-stakeholder partnerships?
That's a good question. It's not easy, and that's probably what makes it worth doing. It's an exciting space to be in. With the Nssn, we've written the rulebook in many ways as we've gone along, and it's constantly evolving, it's constantly changing. What I'm very thankful for is that we have a sponsor, a supporter in the New South Wales government through the Chief Scientist, Hugh Durrant-White here in New South Wales, that hasn't really been very prescriptive in how we achieve what he's asked us to set out to achieve. He's basically said, here's the general direction I want you to head in and what I want you to achieve for New South Wales. You figure out the rest. And that's been really liberating for us to say, okay, well, how can we do this? And to try things out and sometimes fail and to sort of experiment and see what the right settings are. So I think number one is to not be daunted by the task, that if it's worth doing, it's probably going to be hard. The stakeholder engagement part is central to all that we do. You're not going to do this alone. The whole point of it is to bring a whole bunch of people with very different expectations and cultures together and get them pointing in the true north direction and take them on a journey with you. It's about selling a story. And that's something that I've learned more recently. Focusing on KPIs and metrics is hugely important. I think that's going to make sure that you keep getting the funding and the resources to do what you need to do. But you're not going to keep the stakeholders unless you're able to tell a really good story about the work that you're doing. That's what captures people's hearts and what gets them excited to head in the same direction with you. So definitely telling and crafting the story very well is incredibly important in doing something like this.
Yeah, exactly. Couldn't agree more. I think storytelling is an area that universities, I think, can get better at, sharing the great stories that are coming out of them. Nicholas, thank you very much for your time and sharing your insights with us today, telling us more about the Nssn. It's been a really nice conversation. Thank you again for joining us, and I wish you an enjoyable rest of the day in Sydney.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to today's discussion. Follow UIIN on LinkedIn. And if you're enjoying our podcasts, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review in your podcast platform of choice to help other people find this content too.